It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. So you know the headlines, unless you just woke up. And you've probably heard very short sound bites of these Ron Mamdani and Mikey Sherrill victory speeches. Well, with the luxury of time that we have on this show, here's a little more.
The sun may have set over our city this evening, but as Eugene Debs once said, I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity.
The men and women in labor. Union jobs at a time when our economy is set up to make it harder and harder for working people. You know what? They don't just fight for their brothers and sisters in labor. They fight for all of us. For working families everywhere, so everyone has a shot. So thank you.
Thank you to those so often forgotten by the politics of our city who made this movement their own. I speak of Yemeni bodega owners and Mexican abuelas, Senegalese taxi drivers and Uzbek nurses, Trinidadian line cooks and Ethiopian aunties. Yes, aunties. To every New Yorker in Kensington and Midwood and Hunts Point, know this. This city is your city, and this democracy is yours too.
So I hear you, Newark. I'm going to work with communities from the ground up so all of our neighbors thrive. I hear you, Sham, so I'm going to declare a state of emergency on day one to drive down your utility costs. I hear you, Westfield, so I'm going to make sure our kids are safe online and schools have the resources they need to address the mental health crisis. I hear you, Jersey City, so I'm going to hold government accountable, balancing individual liberty with collective responsibility, ensuring people are safe, healthy, educated, and free to pursue their dreams. I hear you, New Jersey. Good government doesn't just manage problems, it solves them.
Together, we will usher in a generation of change. And if we embrace this brave new course, rather than fleeing from it, we can respond to oligarchy and authoritarianism with the strength it fears, not the appeasement it craves. After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
So I'm going to continue to listen and work with you to move our state forward, because I have learned so much as I've traveled our state. Our innovations, our businesses, our inventors and entrepreneurs have amazed me, but it's the people that have left the biggest mark, especially those who are fighting for prosperity for their entire communities. I was moved during my block walk in Trenton with Shanique as she spoke so passionately about the promise of her city and her neighbors despite the challenges. I love the group of young men from Monroe who've been hard at work on this campaign. They want a seat at the table, and they're ready to fight for their future. The little girls who come up to me to say that they're going to be a governor or they're going to be a president. It reminds me of my own belief that anything was possible. Akeem's team, who worked their butts off, knocked over 60,000 doors. Akeem told me these are not the kids who will succeed in Trump's vision of this country, but they will in mine.
And we will build a city hall that stands steadfast alongside Jewish New Yorkers and does not waver in the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism. Where the more than 1 million Muslims know that they belong. Not just in the 5 boroughs of this city, but in the halls of power. No more will New York be a city where you can traffic in Islamophobia and win an election.
So tomorrow begins a new day. And at each new day in New Jersey, the sun rises over the Statue of Liberty, a daily reminder of her promise. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. She declares that her lamp lights the path to the golden door. That golden door is New Jersey. It always has been. And that expectation is well deserved, especially after this election, where we chose, we're going to follow Lady Liberty's beacon. We're not going to give in to our darker impulses. Here in New Jersey, we know that this nation has not ever been, nor will it ever be, ruled by kings.
Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill and Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, some extended excerpts of their victory speeches that we thought you might like to hear on this morning after they both won by bigger margins than any of the polls predicted. Sherrill beat Republican Jack Ciattarelli by 13 points. Mamdani, if you haven't heard this yet, got more votes than Cuomo and Sliwa combined, so he did win a majority, just barely, but over 50%, 50.4% is what I saw, to Cuomo's 42 and just 7% for Curtis Sliwa, whose numbers really crashed as President Trump and others encouraged conservatives to consolidate behind Cuomo. Of course, that is still 49% who voted against Mamdani, and in Sherrill's case, 43% against. So as WNYC's Elizabeth Kim wrote about Mamdani on Gothamist this morning, now comes the hard part. Later this hour, Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill will join us live for a short victory lap appearance, and we'll dive deeper into what comes next for New Jersey. But we begin in New York. WNYC's Elizabeth Kim, as many of you know, has been coming on the show every Wednesday throughout the campaign, and today completes the set. So happy Wednesday, Liz. I hope you got some sleep last night, and good morning.
Good morning, Brian. I think of it as our marathon, right? We ran through the tape last night.
There you go. And listeners, the phones and text message thread are open for your thoughts and feelings this morning, no matter who you voted for. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. If you're in any of the groups that Mamdani or Sherrill shouted out by name, are you feeling seen in a new way? And what would delivering on the hopes that you voted for actually look like? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text. Anyone who picked Cuomo over Mamdani in the primary and switched to Mamdani this time want to call? You know, the numbers suggest a meaningful number of Black and Latino voters especially did that. And are there any Trump Mamdani voters who want to call in. We'll talk about that group and how it actually does exist, according to data analyst Michael Lang. 212-433-9692. Or anyone else, 212-433-WNYC, call or text. Liz, let's first talk about the historic turnout and how Mamdani won. How big and with whom?
Well, before I came in here, Brian, I was talking to our colleague, Bridget Bergen, and she told me it was over 2 million voters, and it's the most since 1969. And I just think that that is a stunning statistic, and it really shows you how motivated people were to come out and vote. I mean, we saw it even starting in the primary, right? We saw the surge in turnout, and it continued into the general election. You know, Mamdani, he won the primary with a multiracial coalition. In the general election, he built on that. You know, we had talked about the concern among some people that he did not win a majority of black voters in the primary. Well, it turns out that he did really well with black voters and also Latino voters. I mean, he was strong with Latino voters in the primary, but, he worked, he was courting black voters in churches. You know, he had made several appearances with Reverend Al Sharpton at the National Action Network, and that seems to have paid off. You know, there was talk at the time, black voters are loyal Democrats. Would they come out to vote for someone that they admittedly did not know that well? And it looks like, by Election Day, they felt that they did know him, and they did vote for him.
And I mentioned the New York City political data analyst Michael Lang, who will, by the way, be a guest on tomorrow's show. We'll take a really granular look at the results. But he already posted some takeaways, including, quote, Mamdani improved from the primary among low-income and middle-class black and Latino voters, as you were just saying, Liz. Also what he calls the Trump Mamdani voters. He says are working-class Latinos, South Asians, and Muslims. So again, listeners, anyone who picked Cuomo over Mamdani in the primary and switched to Mamdani this time, want to call. The numbers suggest a meaningful number of you are out there. And are there any Trump Mamdani voters who want to call in? Do you actually exist? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. And more data here from the New York Times coverage, which says Mamdani built his own new Democratic coalition. It says, for decades, Democrats in New York City have prevailed with a fairly static coalition. White liberals in Manhattan and Brooklyn, black and Latino voters, ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities, and a smattering of other immigrants. Early results suggest that Mr. Mamdani reworked the contours of that coalition, stitching together new alliances that could shift the city's political outlook for years to come. It says he ran up 40 and 50-point margins in Brooklyn's affluent brownstone belt, swept northern Manhattan, and secured slightly more narrow margins in historically black and Latino areas of Brooklyn and the Bronx. We were just talking about those. It continues, Mr. Cuomo pulled away in Orthodox Jewish precincts where he approached 80% of the vote and clearly won large numbers of more liberal Jewish voters in Manhattan and Riverdale and the Bronx that typically back the Democratic nominee. But Mr. Mamdani, who will be the first Muslim and South Asian mayor, more than made up for those losses with two groups most Democrats have overlooked: the young residents of gentrifying neighborhoods like Bushwick and Williamsburg, and the taxi drivers, bodega owners, and other working-class South Asian immigrants in Queens and the Bronx. Unquote from the New York Times. So, Liz, did you see that coalition gather when you covered Mamdani's victory party last night?
Absolutely, Brian. You know, something that stood out to me as I was waiting for Mamdani to come out with his speech was how different this was from 2021 and Eric Adams's victory party. At Adams's victory party, you saw him assemble his coalition on stage with him. And you saw that multiracial coalition that he built on the stage. And I remember thinking, like, oh, this is a little interesting. Mamdani is not choosing to do it that way. It's usually very, very standard in these kinds of election events. You know, you have your supporters standing around you, so that kind of symbolizes, right, the people who got you there. But instead, you had Mamdani giving that speech by himself on stage. Later on, he brings his family to join him. But then as he was talking, you know, and I am shoulder to shoulder, Brian, with the crowd. That was also distinctly different, is how many people were in the audience. And I turn around and I look at the people around me, and they are transfixed. But what really is striking is, to use the phrase of David Dinkins, there was a gorgeous mosaic there that night, but it was in the audience. You really saw it in the audience. Black, white, Latino, Jewish. It was all there in the audience, and he had, you know, there was an exuberance there of young people dancing. That was something that I did not see with Adams, whereas everything was on stage for the cameras. Here, it was all in the audience.
Let me ask you to set up a clip that you have of someone named Khan from the party last night.
Yes, this was a woman who is standing next to me. I was surrounded by many South Asians. She grew up in New York City, but she's actually from Princeton, New Jersey. And she told me that she had driven an hour and a half to see Mamdani and to listen to his speech.
It feels, I'm honored to share a similar, background as him, being South Asian, being Muslim, being a New Yorker. And so to have that ray of hope be someone who is so similar to me just gives me goosebumps, and I'm just so happy to be here.
So there you really hear how personally for South Asians, for Muslims, to see themselves now reflected in City Hall, how meaningful that is for this constituency that makes up, Muslims make up about 1 million people in New York City.
And you brought a clip from a Rabbi Abby Stein at the Mamdani victory party. You want to set this one up?
Sure. So Rabbi Abby Stein is an activist, and she's a member of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. She has been with Mamdani since 2020, and I thought she encapsulated really well what the shift that his candidacy represents in terms of a mayor's stance toward Israel. This is what she said.
We are in a world where an openly anti-Israel, non-Zionist candidate can run and win in the city that has the largest Jewish population in the world. That is a good thing.
Now, Liz, as the Times noted in the data from their article that I read, Jewish voters divided more and differently from the past in the city. But you had that clip of the pro-Mamdani rabbi, and we heard Mamdani from his speech in one of the clips we played say he'll fight what he called the scourge of anti-Semitism, as well as anti-Islamic hate. So despite differences with many Jewish voters on Israel, we'll see what kind of unity he can produce against anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim violence and other hate. Did the rabbi speak to that last night in any way?
I did talk to her about that because, as we know, there were a group of, I think, 100 some odd rabbis across the country who wrote a letter expressing their concern that Mamdani was contributing to somehow the quote unquote mainstreaming of anti-Semitism. Stein, who has a relationship with Mamdani, vigorously or vehemently denied that there was, I think in her words, she said there is not an anti-Semitic bone in his body. But, those concerns were raised. And, up until like the last stretch, Brian, you may have remember reading about there was this very prominent rabbi at the Reform Synagogue, Central Synagogue in New York City, who expressed, that same concern. She did not sign on to the letter, but she did make remarks at her synagogue. And people people in this community are paying attention to that. And I think we need to kind of see how it plays out in the coming weeks. And, in the beginning, first months of his mayoralty is like, how does he, because he didn't win over a lot of these rabbis in New York City. And the question will be, how does he build a relationship with them? They've been such important stakeholders in New York City for decades. What happens next?
Austin and Queens, I think, was at the Mamdani watch party last night, or maybe it was a different one. Austin, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hello, Brian. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be on your show. And yes, I was at the Bohemian Hall and Beer Garden Astoria watch party from Mamdani last night. And being at the watch party was simply a sea of excitement, seeing smiles, and really an opportunity to see hope realized by many of the marginalized over the past several years, maybe even going on a decade. And one big takeaway for me was the type of messaging that Mamdani had offered throughout his entire campaign, which was hopeful and jubilant and embracing. And many of us had felt seen by his words and actions. And his messaging was what I feel the antithesis of Cuomo's messaging, which was quite fearful and even laced with Islamophobia towards the end. And in turn, people based on Mamdani's messaging felt encouraged during the primaries to canvass, to phone bank throughout the summer as well. And I'll end by saying that many of us are galvanized by the fact that Mamdani is sincere about the government wanting to serve the people and wishes for public service to be not only purposeful, but also honorable again.
Austin, thank you very much. Yamil in the Bronx, you're on WNYC. Hello, Yamil.
Oh, hi, how are you? Thanks for taking my call. So I just want to say something about the speeches. Like, Mamdani's speech, his victory speech was awesome. It was like the best speech I have ever heard in my lifetime of candidates accepting. It had, the victory thing, but it had a unity message. It was deep, it had substance. It was embracing of everyone. It just was really, really nice. Now, I was really, really curious about the Cuomo concession speech, and I was just wondering, he says he loves us so much. I wonder how he's going to work with him for the best of everyone. And I just couldn't believe what he was saying. He was saying stuff like, what he was saying, but it was just so contrary, so evil in a way, bad. Like, why? You're supposed to be working for all of us. Whether he's a communist or not a communist, that's not the point. I think Trump is more of a communist. But then this morning I was listening to Lawrence O'Donnell, and he was, last night, I didn't see it last night, but he was talking about how he was curious about Cuomo's concession speech and how he's going to work so good with and I was validated. I was expecting the same thing. So that's basically what I wanted to say. And I'm so happy for the women. They're just so phenomenal. Women are really going to take the power, really.
Thank you very much for your call. And again, if you didn't hear me mention at the top, we will have a big woman winner in about 20 minutes. The governor-elect of New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, will be on. Excellent woman reporter with us right now, WNYC's Elizabeth Kim. Liz, did you watch the Cuomo concession speech? I saw a clip where he was saying, congratulations to Mamdani. We wish him the best. We hope he succeeds. And people were booing, and he was tamping down the boos and saying, no, don't do that. Anything else from you from the Cuomo speech?
I will confess, Brian, I did not have a chance to listen to his speech. When I was there, they did put him on the screen, but you couldn't hear anything because everyone was just booing at him.
I want to note, before we bring on another guest with you from the news site Documented, which covers immigration, so relevant to this election. Now, as you wrote on Gothamist, comes the hard part, how to deliver on his promises, not just because billionaires and conservatives don't like him, but because affordability is really hard. The city's been getting less affordable, we should probably say, under Bloomberg, under de Blasio, under Adams, under Cuomo and Hochul as Democratic governors with supermajority Democratic state legislators. Your article on Gothamist this morning is called Daunting Challenges Await New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani after historic win. How would you begin to describe those challenges?
So I just want to shout out my colleague, John Campbell, who did a lot of the heavy lifting for that story. You know, I was just contributing quotes and interviews for him, but he was up late at night crafting that. Well, what I would say is, you know, there will be immediate expectations with Mamdani. You know, he has promised to do something which is really hard, which is to transform politics from something in the abstract to something that actually touches people's lives. And I think, in fact, he talked about that in his speech. And in this particular case, it will be relieving the high cost burden of living in this city. So there's the question, you know, what is the breadth of people who will be able to feel this change, right? Under the proposals that he's made, it should be pretty much everyone, because if you're thinking about something like free buses, that's everyone who takes the bus, of course. Universal childhood, that's every family that needs that child care. But that's going to be really, really expensive, and he's going to have to find a way to fund it.
Jim in the Bronx, I think, switched from Cuomo in the primary to Mamdani in the general. Jim, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I just wanted to say I was actually made up my mind yesterday when Cuomo came on your show. You asked him what his number one issue was. I couldn't believe he said it was public safety. As important as public safety is right now, that is not the hot issue. It was almost, I couldn't believe that somebody as experienced as him, if I could have advised him, I would have said, go, you know, fight back against Mamdani on why you would be better for affordability, which is the key issue right now. But the fact that he said public safety yesterday just showed how out of touch he was with what's going on right now in our city. Everybody's struggling, and I switched my vote. But I would also, the other thing I wanted to say also is he did get 40%, which is not insignificant. And if you give him Sliwa's 7%, if Sliwa had dropped out a couple months ago, might have been a much tighter race. So I just don't think Cuomo ran a good campaign, which was surprising for somebody as experienced as him. So good luck to Mamdani.
Jim, thank you very much for your call. And yeah, Liz, it's worth noting, as I did in the intro, but that was almost a half hour ago now, that though Mamdani got more votes than Cuomo and Sliwa combined, it was just a few tenths of a percent over 50%. So about 49% voted against Mamdani. How does that set him up for the politics of his administration?
Well, what it means is there will clearly be people who look at that and say, you do not have a mandate. And you could already see that he was trying to head off that kind of pushback or criticism in his speech, because in his speech, I think, you know, I was rereading it this morning, and I think he said several times, this is a mandate. So he's coming out and proactively saying, I have a mandate. But I think people will look at that, the numbers, and I think, you know, we're still counting all the votes, and, you know, how far he gets over 50%, you know, we'll see. But, you know, I think it's fair to say it's not, you know, it's a little, if it's a little over, if it's 51%, is that really a mandate? Is it a strong enough mandate? That would mean, you know, there was a good chunk of voters who did not believe in his vision.
Right. Although we see, I don't know if Trump is an example that Mamdani supporters would like being used here, but Trump barely won, you know, last year. He won the Electoral College fairly decisively, but a popular vote with not quite 50%. So certainly a lot of people oppose Trump, but he's got his majority in both houses of Congress, and he has proceeded certainly not to try to be some kind of unifier, trying to take care of everybody's interests, but going, you know, hard on the agenda that he believes in and that his most hardcore supporters believed in. Mamdani, too, will have a very progressive city council, and they've got that Democratic supermajority state legislature. So I think politically speaking, it's a question how much of a mandate over 50% he actually needs to enact a lot of his agenda.
That's right, Brian. Although, if you remember, Eric Adams had the same thing, but he was basically at war with the city council for, most of his tenure on a lot of policy issues.
Well, they may not have been as ideologically
That's
aligned.
right. That's right. But, I think what we're going to see play out in the coming days is how does Mamdani handle the speaker's race? Does he try to shape that race at all? We have Julie Menon, a council member from Manhattan, who is more of a centrist, who's considered she's considered really sort of the top candidate in that race. She's also facing a challenge from Crystal Hudson from Brooklyn, who is considered more left-leaning. But the test then becomes for Mamdani is, does he try to weigh in? Does he try to whip votes in that race for a speaker who is more progressive? Because certainly I think it would help him to have a more progressive ally leading the council.
We'll continue with our post-election coverage right after this.
I am young, despite my best efforts to grow older. I am Muslim. I am a democratic socialist. And most damning of all, I refuse to apologize for any of this.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. That, of course, from Mamdani's victory speech last night. As we continue with our post-election show this morning, Liz Kim is still with us. And also joining us, Ethar El-Katatney, editor-in-chief of Documented, which describes itself as New York's source for immigration news. Ethar, thanks for some time this morning. Welcome to WNYC.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
What's your lead angle on Documented?
So Documented is a newsroom that is for immigrants and primarily staffed by immigrants, led by an immigrant. We publish in 4 languages, English, Spanish, Chinese, and Haitian Creole, for immigrants about the stories that matter to them and on the platforms that they're on. So we're on everything from WhatsApp for the Spanish community, WeChat for the Chinese community, and Nextdoor for the Caribbean community. And we've been covering this race very closely.
And Mamdani often talks about New York City's Muslims, for example, feeling as though they are living in the shadows, a phrase he's used. Are you familiar with the meaning there, and what might today, the morning after his victory, feel like for any Muslim New Yorkers or communities of Muslim New Yorkers who you report on?
Yeah, so New York is, of course, as we've just been discussing, is a city of more than 3 million immigrants. 2/3 of all families have immigrant members, and about 500,000 in the city are undocumented. And we are the multiracial, multi-religious city where the intersectionalities among these racial lines, faith lines, are really what we report on. So along in our Chinese communities, our Latino communities, Indo-Caribbean, South Asian, even Arabs, we've been following very closely. And what we've been seeing over the last few months, again, being out in several boroughs, yesterday we were out at everything from like the Bronx to Staten Island to Flushing to Chinatown to Jackson Heights, talking to immigrants, which is regardless of the faith they identify with, it is the intersectionalities that they see with Mamdani as resonating with them. His issues and talking about affordability, talking about the issues they care about is really what resonates deeply with them. The fact that he, has been clear on his inclusive message, right? Whether it is on faith, on LGBTQ issues, being Black, being immigrant, being Jewish, only adds a nuance to that. But I can speak more to, maybe some of the Islamophobic things, some of the messaging, and what we've been seeing on the ground.
And here's a little bit more from the Mamdani victory speech where he shouts out some of the immigrant communities explicitly. Listen.
We will hold bad landlords to account because the Donald Trumps of our city have grown far too comfortable taking advantage of their tenants. We will put an end to the culture of corruption that has allowed billionaires like Trump to evade taxation and exploit tax breaks. We will stand alongside unions and expand labor protections because we know, just as Donald Trump does, that when working people have ironclad rights, the bosses who seek to extort them become very small indeed. New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and as of tonight, led by an immigrant. So hear me, President Trump, when I say this. To get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us.
How about that clip, Ethar? Certainly historic.
Definitely. So we've been reporting all year on the first year of the Trump presidency. And really, if I were to sum it up for immigrant communities, fear has really been the overarching theme, right? It has caused immigrants to change their habits, affecting, should I go to court? Should I go to my place of worship? Should I go to restaurants? Should I pick up my kids from school? It's changed the way immigrant New Yorker live. They've been living this year. So in Mamdani's messaging, it really has been them seeing, thinking of how the Trump administration may target the city with aggressive immigration enforcement, how it's been happening. The way Mamdani has been speaking for immigrants, feeling that they have a support in their mayor, especially seeing, the way Adams has changed his tone in immigration over the past few years. Immigrant communities that we've been seeing who have been seeing, attacks on their communities, attacks in rhetoric, and the issues that they care about also represented. We have been hearing very loudly from them that everything Mamdani has been talking about, they have turned up because of his consistent messaging, his representation, seeing that across all of newsrooms, everything from, Hindus for Zohran, Africans for Zohran, Desis rising up and moving, street vendors for Zohran, all of them across the board believing in that messaging and in that representation and joining with a new level of energy, organization, participation, and enthusiasm. I think what we've seen is the consequential voting bloc that immigrants represent in New York City and the importance of listening not just to their needs, but also accurately reflecting that to your caller who just mentioned, thinking of public safety as the number one issue when really it is affordability for the vast majority of New Yorkers.
And Elizabeth Kim, we certainly heard in that clip and one of the ones we played earlier that Mamdani really got in President Trump's face last night in that speech, right?
That's right, Brian. And, that was sort of what helped him starting in the primary. He had that clip of himself, right, going after Trump's immigration czar in Albany, and that went viral. And it's very much his sort of willingness to take on the Trump administration that has distinguished him in both the general and during the primary.
Ernest in Flatbush, you're on WNYC. Hello, Ernest.
Thank you, Brian, and an excellent job by Elizabeth Kim. I was at the victory party last night, and I can attest to the varied communities that came together. The one observation I made since I was right up front is that the photographers, I saw one East Asian photographer. There were no blacks as far as I could see. So that's something that needs to improve. I also want to indicate that Zoran has a mandate from everybody except Schumer, Gillibrand, and Jacob. We are here to support him 100%.
Ernest, thank you very much. And I'm going to go right on to Miriam in Brooklyn. You're on WNYC. Hi, Miriam.
Hi, Brian. It's such a wonderful day in New York City. We have Mamdani at City Hall, and I just wanted to say congratulations to all of us. And I wanted to share with you the energy that was in Bushwick, the youth is just magnificent. The wave is taking all of us, and we all have to jump on the wagon. But I called to share something with you about the name Mamdani. So in Arabic, Al-Maidan is the square where the people gather. And when you put Al-Mamdani, it's grammatically speaking, inclusiveness, and it becomes the gatherer. So I just think that this is such a destiny for him to be the gatherer of all of us, and bringing us hope, and making us believe that we can turn the wheel, and everything is going to be. I definitely believe that he will be able to produce all the promises, because he is surrounding himself with an amazing team. So voilà.
Miriam,
Thank you, Brian, and congratulations. Yes, go ahead.
I'm so glad you called with something about the name Mamdani other than people's failure to pronounce it.
Oh, mon Dieu, no. Yeah, so Al-Mamdani, his name is Mamdani, and he's awesome. And, yesterday we were all gathered outside, because we were not inside the Paramount, but we were gathered outside, and we were waiting for him to come out, and we were like, please come say hi, please come say hi. And finally he sneaked out behind us in the big limousine, and he poured all his body out of the window with his big smile, cheering to all of us, and it was just magnificent. We wish him all the best, and I want to say to you, Brian, and to Miss Elizabeth Kim, that throughout all this campaign, your behavior, you actually made me listen back to Radio NYC. Comment dire, you just, comment dire, you brought us, like the energy that he was also giving to us. So thank you very much.
You're very kind. We have just been trying to be fair to all the candidates, and also, honestly, scrutinize all the candidates. Not everybody thinks we were so nice to Mamdani, or so nice to Cuomo, or so nice to Sliwa. But Miriam, I'm glad you appreciated what you appreciated. Ethar, there's an article undocumented, one of your writers' articles, that has the headline, "These Mamdani voters aren't taking Cuomo's anti-Hindu bait." What was the anti-Hindu bait?
Yeah, so we've been covering both, anti-Asian, anti-Hindu, Islamophobic commentary that's been coming both from mainstream, from news organizations, and from candidates. So specifically when it comes to, anti-Hindu sentiment, we saw, there's obviously been groups, Indian Americans for Cuomo, to give you an example. They flew a banner across the skies a few months ago, talking about how he promotes division, that Mamdani promotes division, alienates Hindu New Yorkers. And part of that it actually gave rise to a Hindus for Zohran group who actively worked to, combat some of this misinformation. A photo of him wearing, shoes, saying that he's wearing a shoe at a temple, but saying actually that's not the case. That just because he's criticism of Indian Prime Minister Modi doesn't mean, that is anti-Hindu. And I would really say that across all of these groups, really, these attacks are really below the belt. They are, last-ditch attempts to divide. Accusations I would even, bring into that, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, where they are ways to divide. We actually talked to Mamdani a while ago, and one of his quotes was, that, the politics of division that we're here seeing, and that his, mandate is also to offer the hopeful vision of the future, right? A campaign that is showing you can build that multiracial, multi-religious coalition that will inspire and bring hope, similar to, your call-ins. We're expressing the same. So we've been covering very consistently the groups that were working actively to fight against rhetoric that tried to paint Mamdani's identities or unwillingness to speak on specific issues as being anti, whatever identity trait that is. So that article, along with others, we really went deep into these communities that, seemed on the surface that then would be anti-Zohran or pro-Kumo, but actually were actively canvassing for him, making sure that they aren't taking that bait and really doing the deep dive to explain why it was, attacks against Mamdani, but not actually Hindu-phobic or anti-Hindu.
Ethar El-Katatney, editor-in-chief of Documented, which describes itself as New York's source for immigration news. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And WNYC's Elizabeth Kim. We will talk, Liz.
Thank you, Brian.